Most people think regret comes from the big mistakes, the kind everyone can see. But the regret that stayed with me my whole life came from something small, a phone call I never made. My name is Daniel Harris, and I'm 79 years old now, and for more than 40 years I've carried the memory of that quiet moment when pride was louder than love. Back then I was a different man, younger, louder, certain that I understood how the world worked. I was 36, working long hours at a hardware supply company outside a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My days were filled with invoices, deliveries, and the constant feeling that if I just worked a little harder, life would finally settle down. At home, things weren't always peaceful. My younger brother Michael and I had grown up close, the kind of brothers who shared everything when we were boys. We built forts in the woods behind our house, raced bicycles down dusty roads, and spent long summer evenings fishing at the river. But somewhere along the way, adulthood changed the rhythm between us. Michael was always the softer one. He listened more than he spoke, and he cared about people in a way I never quite understood back then. I was the practical one, the one who believed problems could be solved if you just stood firm and didn't bend. The argument that changed everything started over something so ordinary that it almost feels embarrassing to explain now. Our father had passed away the year before, leaving behind the old family house. It wasn't worth much money, but it was filled with memories, and memories can make people stubborn. Michael wanted to keep the place exactly as it was. He said it felt wrong to sell it, wrong to erase the place where our parents had spent their lives. I saw it differently. To me, the house was a responsibility, a roof that needed repairs, and bills that needed paying. I believed selling it was the sensible thing to do. We argued in the kitchen one afternoon, standing in the same room where our mother used to bake bread on Sunday mornings. The conversation started calm enough, but it slowly hardened. Voices rose. Words became sharper than they needed to be. I remember the exact moment the argument turned into something heavier. Michael looked at me and said, "You're acting like none of this means anything to you," and without thinking, I said something that I would replay in my mind for the next 4 decades. I told him memories didn't keep the lights on. The silence that followed was thick. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Then he nodded slowly, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of the house without another word. At the time, I convinced myself it was just a fight between brothers. Families argue. People cool down. Life moves on. But the next day turned into a week. The week turned into a month. We didn't speak. Every now and then I would think about calling him. I would pick up the phone and stare at the numbers. I knew his number by heart. My fingers would hover there for a moment. But something inside me kept saying, let him call first. Pride has a quiet voice, but it's stubborn. Months passed. Our mother tried to bring us together once during a Sunday dinner, but the air between us was heavy and awkward. We barely looked at each other across the table. When the meal ended, we both left quickly. After that, we simply lived separate lives in the same town. Michael started working at a local school, helping with maintenance and repairs. I heard about it from other people. Small town news travels in quiet ways. Sometimes someone would mention seeing him at the grocery store or fixing a fence for a neighbor. Each time I heard his name, the thought would return, you should call him. And each time I pushed the thought away, Years have a strange way of passing faster than you expect. Work kept me busy. I got married. My daughter was born. Life filled itself with responsibilities and small daily routines. But every now and then, usually late at night when the house was quiet, I would remember the kitchen, the argument and the look on Michael's face when he walked out the door. And still, I didn't make the call. One winter morning, about 4 years after that argument, I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee before work when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a man from the school where Michael worked. There had been an accident on an icy road outside town. His truck slid into a ditch early that morning. He didn't survive. I remember the way the room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had moved closer together. The coffee in my hand went cold before I even realized I was still holding the mug. At the funeral, I stood quietly among people who had known him in ways I hadn't allowed myself to for years. Former co-workers talked about how patient he was with the students. A neighbor spoke about how Michael fixed her broken porch steps without asking for payment. I listened to all of it, realizing how much of his life I had missed while waiting for the other person to make the first move. After the service, my mother hugged me tightly. She didn't say anything about the argument or the silence between us. She didn't have to. That night I sat alone in my living room, staring at the telephone on the small table beside the couch, the same telephone I had looked at hundreds of times before. For the first time in years, I reached for it, and that was the moment I understood something that still sits heavy in my chest, even now at 79 years old. Some calls cannot be made too late. I spent a long time wishing life allowed us to rewind small moments, not the big dramatic ones, just the ordinary ones. The quiet evening when pride whispers louder than kindness. The simple chance to say, "Let's talk." As the years passed, the regret didn't disappear the way I once hoped it would. It simply changed shape. It became quieter, but deeper. A small ache that shows up when you least expect it. When my daughter was a teenager, and we had our first serious argument, I found myself picking up the phone later that night just to apologize for my part in it. Not because I was always right, but because I knew exactly what silence can turn into. Now I'm an old man who spends a lot of evenings sitting by the window, watching the sun lower itself behind the trees, the same way it did when Michael and I were boys fishing by the river. Sometimes I imagine what that phone call might have sounded like. Maybe it would have started awkwardly. Maybe neither of us would have known exactly what to say. But I like to believe we would have laughed eventually, the way brothers do when enough time passes. I can't know for sure. That chance belongs to a version of the past that no longer exists. But if there's one quiet thing I've learned after 79 years of living, it's this. Most of the time, the hardest call to make is the one that matters the most. So if there's someone in your life you haven't spoken to because pride told you to wait, don't wait the way I did. Pick up the phone while the other voice can still answer.